The story begins with a moment that no one on the base would ever forget. The sun was barely rising over the horizon when a small gray government SUV rolled past the checkpoint of Falcon Ridge Military Base. The guards barely glanced at it. After all, it was just another transport vehicle with just another passenger. But what they didn't know was that the quiet figure in the back seat would change everything about the base, its discipline, its reputation, and its future. And that's exactly where United War brings you today, uncovering the story no one expected. A story that shows how arrogance blinds even the most decorated officers, and how rank, true rank, isn't worn on a smile, but earned in silence. She stepped out of the SUV slowly, her boots touching the pavement with a confidence that didn't shout, didn't demand attention, but carried a kind of calm authority only those who had seen real battle possessed. Her duffel bag hung lightly over her shoulder. Her uniform was simple, regulation standard, with no visible markings of rank, an intentional decision she had made before arriving. To everyone watching that morning, she looked like any other incoming officer. Maybe a transfer, maybe a newbie, nothing unusual. That was the first mistake the base would make. She walked across the courtyard, observing everything with quiet focus. The poorly maintained vehicles, the half-asleep soldiers dragging themselves toward formation, the casual conversations happening where strict discipline should have been. Even before reaching the main building, she could already sense that the entire facility had slipped into a dangerous culture of laziness and ego. And the man responsible for maintaining order here was the last person she'd expect to see acting so carelessly, Colonel Warren Briggs. The colonel spotted her from across the yard. He didn't recognize her, didn't salute, and didn't even offer a proper greeting. Instead, he laughed with two other officers as he pointed in her direction, saying something loud enough for several soldiers nearby to hear. "Looks like we got another kid lost on the way to training. Hope she knows this isn't a daycare." She didn't react. Not a smile, not a frown. Just silence. Steady, unreadable silence. As she stepped closer, the colonel crossed his arms and smirked, blocking her path. "You must be new. Let me guess. They told you military life builds character?" The officers around him chuckled. She simply replied, "I'm here to see the commanding officer." Briggs scoffed. "Sweetheart, you're looking at him, and I don't recall approving any transfer for a junior officer." She studied him carefully, noting his posture, his arrogance, and the underlying insecurity that practically radiated from his grin. But even then, she didn't correct him. He waved her off dismissively. "Drop your bag somewhere and someone will point you to orientation. And don't worry, we'll make sure you don't get lost." Again. For a moment, she considered responding, not with anger, not with authority, but with truth. But she kept walking, ignoring his attempt to belittle her. That silence alone irritated him more than any argument could. Soldiers nearby were already whispering, confused by the way she carried herself. They could tell there was something different about her, something controlled, something trained far beyond the average officer. Inside the headquarters building, she moved with familiarity, as if she had walked these halls before. She glanced at bulletin boards, outdated tactical maps, unnecessary memos pinned everywhere, signs of a base that had been operating with sloppy leadership for too long. And Colonel Briggs followed her inside, still amused by what he assumed was her cluelessness. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked sharply. "I didn't tell you to enter HQ." She turned slightly, not stopping, not giving him the satisfaction of eye contact. "I don't require your permission." Briggs' amusement faded into irritation. "You do when you're on my base." His base. The words echoed in the hallway. Soldiers passing by averted their eyes, not wanting to get involved. That was the culture here. Avoid conflict, avoid responsibility, avoid correcting authority even when that authority was broken. She walked straight toward the office at the end of the corridor. The colonel paced quickly behind her, now visibly frustrated. "You can't just—" But the sentence died in his throat when she entered the room without knocking.
Inside the office, a startled lieutenant stood at attention so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "Ma'am!" Before he could finish, Briggs stormed in after her. "Lieutenant, remove her from this building immediately!" The lieutenant froze, eyes wide, glancing between Briggs and the woman. He swallowed hard. "Sir, she's cleared for entry." Briggs scoffed. "By who?" The woman finally turned fully toward the colonel. Her eyes were calm, steady, carrying a depth he failed to see earlier. "By the Department of Defense," she replied softly. 48 hours ago." The colonel blinked, confused. "What is that supposed to mean?" The lieutenant nervously opened a folder on his desk and handed Briggs a document. And that was the moment everything changed. On the paper was an official high-clearance transfer order with a seal he had only seen a few times in his career. His eyes scanned the name, the signature, and the classified rank designation. His face went pale. She wasn't a recruit. She wasn't a junior officer. She wasn't even someone he outranked. She outranked him. By miles. And not just him, she outranked nearly everyone on the entire base. She was the new commanding admiral assigned to take full control of Falcon Ridge. She watched him slowly lower the paper, his arrogance evaporating as the truth settled in. But she didn't scold him, she didn't humiliate him. She simply picked up her duffel bag and said calmly, "Colonel Briggs, when you're ready, I'll be in my office." Then she walked away, leaving him frozen, stunned, and suddenly aware of the consequences that were coming. And that was only the beginning.
Colonel Briggs stood in the hallway long after she walked away, gripping the paper with trembling fingers. His pride had taken a blow so hard he could barely breathe. Soldiers pretended not to stare, but everyone felt the shift in the air. The base, once loud and careless, had gone silent, not out of respect, but out of fear of what might come next. Meanwhile, she made her way to the top floor, the office reserved for base commanders. She entered without ceremony, glanced around at the unorganized desk, the dusty shelves, the outdated communication equipment, and sighed quietly. This office belonged to the man who was supposed to uphold discipline. Instead, it had become a reflection of neglect. She set her bag down gently and opened the blinds, allowing natural light to expose everything that had been hidden in the shadows for years. She didn't sit down immediately. Instead, she paced the room, taking in every detail, every sign of poor leadership that had trickled down to the soldiers who deserved better. She knew her mission here wasn't simply administrative. She was sent because this base was falling apart from the inside. Complaints from enlisted troops, concerns from higher command, reports of operational failures. All of it had reached Washington. Falcon Ridge needed a leader, and she had been appointed because she had turned around bases more troubled than this. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see the lieutenant from earlier. He entered nervously, holding a clipboard tightly to his chest. "Ma'am," he started quietly, "I've prepared the initial briefing documents you requested. Colonel Briggs, he's on his way." She nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant Harris. Please sit." He hesitated. He had never been invited to sit in this office before. It felt strange, but he complied, still stiff with anxiety. She spoke calmly, her voice steady and warm. "You seem competent? How long have you been serving under Colonel Briggs?" 3 years, ma'am." "And how would you describe the state of the base?" The lieutenant hesitated, clearly afraid to speak negatively about his superior. She noticed his discomfort. "Lieutenant," she said gently, "I asked for your observation, not your loyalty test." He swallowed. "Ma'am, the base is undisciplined. Morale is low. Maintenance cycles are behind. Many soldiers don't feel heard. Some are afraid to report issues. Training standards have dropped." She nodded slowly. Everything she already suspected, everything the reports hinted at, everything the colonel ignored. Another knock sounded, but this one was louder, brisk,
authoritative, almost defiant. She didn't need to guess who it was. She instructed Harris to stay as she called out, "Enter." Colonel Briggs stepped in, straightening his shoulders in a last attempt to appear in control, but his eyes betrayed the storm of embarrassment and panic swirling inside. He walked toward the center of the room, each step measured and stiff. "Admiral," he said quietly, forcing the word out with difficulty, "I wasn't aware of your arrival." "I know," she replied calmly. "That was intentional." He blinked, confused. "Intentional?" "Yes. Command wanted an honest snapshot of how you run this facility, and I needed to see how the base functioned without the pressure of a scheduled inspection." The air tightened. Harris stared at the floor, aware this conversation was about to reshape the entire command structure. Briggs's jaw clenched. "With respect, Admiral, if I had known—" "You would have pretended," she interrupted softly. "Everyone would have behaved for 72 hours, and then everything would slip back to what it was before. I needed to see the real Falcon Ridge, not the polished version." Briggs' breathing grew heavier. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but she spoke again before he could. "Colonel, your job is to lead, not laugh at those under you. Your job is to enforce discipline, not ignore it. Your job is to maintain this base, not let it rot." Her tone wasn't harsh, it wasn't emotional, it was surgical, precise, cold, truthful. Briggs looked down, his confidence cracking. "Ma'am," he said, "I never meant disrespect. I thought she—" He stopped himself, realizing how ridiculous his excuse sounded. She walked toward him slowly, her boots tapping softly against the smooth floor. When she stood only a few feet away, she looked him straight in the eye. "You saw what you wanted to see," she said. "You assumed rank based on appearance. You assumed weakness because you weren't challenged. You assumed authority because no one questioned you." He swallowed hard, unable to escape her gaze. "And that," she said, "is why I was sent here." The room felt smaller. The air grew heavier. Briggs tried again, voice shaking slightly. "Ma'am, I will correct my behavior immediately." "You'll do more than that," she replied. "As of this moment, your authority is suspended pending review. You will remain on base, but you will not issue orders until my assessment is complete." Harris's eyes widened. Briggs nearly staggered. For a colonel, being suspended was one step away from career death. "Ma'am, please," he stuttered, the words barely audible. "Everything I've built here—" "This base wasn't built," she said sharply. "It was tolerated." A long silence followed. Briggs lowered his head for the first time since joining the military, not out of respect, but out of realization. She turned away from him. "You may go, Colonel." He hesitated, hoping for some mercy, but none came. He walked out quietly, the weight of humiliation pressing down on him like armor he could no longer wear. When the door closed, she exhaled deeply. Harris finally looked up. "Ma'am, what happens now?" She glanced at the window, where soldiers were beginning their morning drills, some slacking, some trying, all unaware of the change that had just begun. "Now," she said calmly, "we rebuild this base from the ground up." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of orders being shouted, but soon, very soon, everything would sound different, because the Admiral had arrived, and nothing at Falcon Ridge would ever be the same again.
The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across Falcon Ridge. Word spread like wildfire through the barracks, the cafeteria, the hangars, every soldier, mechanic, clerk, and pilot now whispering the same thing. The woman Colonel Briggs insulted wasn't a recruit at all. She was the new Admiral, and she had taken command. Some soldiers felt relief. Others felt fear. A few felt shame for laughing along with Briggs earlier. But everyone felt something powerful shift across the base, like a long sleep had been broken, and a new day had begun, whether they were ready for it or not. Meanwhile, in her new office, she studied the files stacked before her. Reports of missed drills, failed inspections, equipment that hadn't been serviced, aircraft overdue for maintenance, behavioral complaints. It was worse than she expected. This wasn't a leadership issue anymore. It was a cultural collapse. Lieutenant Harris stood across the desk, watching her closely as she flipped through documents with sharp precision. He was nervous, but in a different way now. Not fearful, hopeful. "Lieutenant," she said without looking up, "assemble every department head at 0900. Full briefing. No excuses, no absences." "Yes, ma'am." "And Harris," she added, finally meeting her eyes, "I want you seated next to me." His eyebrows lifted. "Me, ma'am? You've been doing Briggs's work for the last year. It's time you received the responsibility that matches your effort." For a moment, the young lieutenant looked stunned. He straightened his posture, swallowed hard, and nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down." She returned to the files, and Harris hurried out, leaving her to her thoughts. She wasn't here simply to replace Briggs. She was here to rebuild discipline, culture, accountability, and pride. And she knew the first briefing would determine whether the base followed her or resisted her. By 0900, the conference room buzzed with tension. Officers filled the long table. Major ranks, squadron commanders, logistics chiefs, medical staff, intelligence heads. Some looked irritated, others anxious, a few curious. None of them fully understood the power shift yet. Lieutenant Harris stood near the projector, shuffling notes with shaky hands. Every few seconds, he glanced at the door. Then, she entered. The room snapped to silence. Officers jumped to their feet, almost instinctively, as if some unseen force demanded discipline they hadn't shown in years. She walked to the head of the table, uniform crisp, eyes steady, posture composed. Harris quickly pulled out her chair. "Please sit." The officers obeyed instantly. She didn't smile. She didn't soften her tone. She began with truth. "Falcon Ridge is failing." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Another frowned. "I have reviewed your performance reports, your readiness assessments, your training schedules, and your administrative structure. This base," she continued, "has not met federal standards in over 18 months. A murmur rippled across the room. "Aircraft maintenance cycles are behind. Tactical readiness is below acceptable levels. Morale is collapsing. Training discipline is inconsistent. And the culture under Colonel Briggs," she paused, "has allowed problems to go unaddressed." She watched their faces carefully. Some broke eye contact. Some glared. A few silently agreed. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said. "I was not sent here to maintain stability. I was sent here because stability no longer exists." One of the squadron leaders, Major Tillman, leaned forward, irritation flickering in his eyes. "Admiral, with respect, we weren't given the resources." "Major Tillman, you had the resources. You lacked oversight." His jaw shut. Harris hid the smallest smile. Another officer, Captain Rollins, lifted a hand. "Ma'am, is it true you arrived unannounced?" "Yes." "Then why the secrecy?" "Because I needed to see the truth. And I saw enough in 10 minutes to know this base has been operating under the illusion of control." A heavy silence settled over the room. Then she tapped a button, and the screen behind her lit up with a full assessment summary. The officers watched, stunned, as she recited verbatim failures recorded months ago. Failures no one expected an outsider to know so quickly. "As of today," she continued, "I am implementing new directives. There will be no negotiations." The officers straightened as if electricity shot through their spines. She pointed to individual names on her list. "Major Tillman, your squadron will return to full training cycles starting tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am." "Captain Rollins, your maintenance backlog will be cleared within 10 days." "Yes, ma'am." "Commander Vasquez, your intelligence unit will undergo restructuring immediately." "Yes, ma'am." "And Colonel Briggs," she paused for effect, "even though he wasn't present, is relieved of operational authority
until further notice. None of the officers looked surprised. Some looked relieved. She leaned forward slightly. You are all capable of excellence. Your records prove it. But excellence dies when leaders get comfortable. That ends today. Her tone softened, not weak, but human. I am not here to punish you. I am here to lead you. And leadership begins with accountability. The room was still. The officers listened. But understand this, she continued. I will not ask you to do anything I have not done myself. I have rebuilt bases, restructured fleets, and commanded personnel in war zones you've only read about. I know what you are capable of when properly led. Harris watched the officers' expressions shift. Skepticism faded. Respect began to form. She concluded with a quiet firmness. Falcon Ridge is going to change, and you will change with it. As the briefing ended and the officers filed out, whispers filled the hallway, but the tone had shifted. Not fear, not gossip, hope. Harris approached her. Ma'am, I think they believe in you. She glanced at the window where soldiers were gathering for drills. Belief is earned, Lieutenant, and tomorrow we start earning it. The sun dipped behind the hangars. The air was calm but charged with a new sense of direction. For the first time in years, Falcon Ridge wasn't drifting. It had a leader.
The room went so still that it felt as though even the air itself was refusing to move. Every officer, every clerk, every enlisted technician on duty stared at the scene unfolding before them. Colonel Briggs stood frozen, his face pale, his jaw slack. Across from him, Admiral Lawson waited calmly, hands behind her back, posture straight, confidence steady, as if she'd handled this exact moment 1,000 times before in her long career. And deep down, she probably had. This wasn't her first encounter with an arrogant officer who judged before understanding, but this one was different because it had happened in front of the entire command center. She didn't gloat, she didn't glare, she didn't smirk. Instead, she simply said, "Colonel, is there something you'd like to say?" Her voice carried not anger, not spite, just authority. The kind of authority that didn't need volume to be heard. It was the sort of voice that made men straighten their backs and remember their place in the chain of command. Colonel Briggs swallowed hard. Moments ago, he'd been mocking her, treating her like a lost trainee who didn't belong. Now he understood the truth, a truth that hit like a sledgehammer. He had been belittling a woman who outranked him by several levels, a woman whose service record could fill an entire wall with medals, citations, and commendations, a woman who had the power to shut down his entire career with a single signature. Everyone waited for his response. Every second stretched long, uncomfortable, heavy. Finally, Briggs forced out the words, "Admiral Lawson, I apologize for my behavior." She nodded once. Apology accepted. But understand this, Colonel. Rank isn't about who looks the part. It's about who earned it. Her words struck like a quiet storm, soft but impossible to ignore. Then, without another glance in Briggs's direction, she turned her attention to the operations table. "Now," she said, "let's get to work. You have a readiness drill in 30 minutes. I assume you're prepared?" "Yes, Admiral," Briggs managed, standing stiffer than he ever had. Around the room, officers exchanged knowing looks. Respect, true respect, had been earned the moment she walked in. But now it was unmistakable. The air shifted. The tone of the room became sharper, more focused. Because when an admiral walked in unexpectedly, everyone paid attention. When this admiral walked in, they elevated. She spent the next several hours reviewing the base's overlooked weaknesses, communications gaps, slow response teams, untested protocols. Nothing escaped her scrutiny. And as she worked, officers who once dismissed her now scrambled to match her pace, taking notes, asking questions, doing everything they could to follow her lead. But the most surprising transformation came from Colonel Briggs himself. Instead of sulking or retreating into his office, he approached her directly. "Admiral," he said carefully, "if you'd like,
I'd appreciate your guidance on adjusting the air defense rotation schedule. I believe your experience would offer perspective we haven't considered." It wasn't groveling, it wasn't fear, it was sincerity, and she recognized it immediately. "Good," she said. "Let's see what you have." The two of them worked side by side, and slowly the tension dissolved. Briggs began to understand who she really was, someone forged in real battle, someone who'd earned every stripe and star by walking through fire, someone who didn't demand respect, but commanded it simply by standing still. By the end of the day, the base ran smoother, sharper, cleaner than it had in years. Officers whispered about how the Admiral's visit had shaken the entire chain of command awake. They talked about her calm power, her disciplined presence, and yes, they talked about the moment she revealed her rank, a story that would likely be retold for years to come. As dusk settled outside the windows, she prepared to leave. Briggs approached her one last time. "Admiral Lawson," he said carefully, "I misjudged you. That won't happen again. And if you ever return, I hope this base reflects the standard you showed us today." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "See that it does, Colonel. You've got potential. Don't waste it." Her voice carried no resentment, only expectation, and that was far heavier. When she finally stepped outside, the wind was cool, brushing gently against the runway. A transport vehicle waited for her to take her to the next facility on her inspection list. Another base, another team, another chance to push standards higher. As she climbed inside, she glanced back at the command building. The base lights glowed against the evening sky, and in the distance, she could see figures still moving quickly, fixing systems, adjusting protocols, setting new benchmarks. Her visit had changed them. And perhaps that was the point of leadership, not just to command, but to transform. The vehicle pulled away slowly, disappearing into the dim horizon. And back at the base, Colonel Briggs watched from the doorway, realizing he had just met someone who would define the rest of his military career, not through punishment, but through example. And that is how a simple misunderstanding, a careless assumption, and an unexpected arrival revealed the truth. The new girl wasn't new at all. She was the superior they should have been preparing for, and she left them far better than she found them.